Welcome to the Scarlet Tavern. Grab a drink, take a seat, and let's begin. On tonight's episode, we're diving into the depths of history to uncover the epic tale of a Viking warrior so fierce he could have given Chuck Norris a run for his money. So grab your horned helmets and prepare to set sail with the one and only Harald Hardrada, the ultimate Norse rock star of the Middle Ages. This is Scarlet Tavern. Alright, how's it going, everybody?
Scald. It's going great.
Yes. We
No,
need to.
Scald. What is that you're eating? Fucking white chocolate?
It's birthday cake Kit Kat bars.
Ugh,
You're just jealous.
that's disgusting.
What? Oh
You
my
are,
god. You know what? Somebody else do this podcast.
you are
Who lost
disgusting.
that privilege?
Oh,
my God.
okay.
Oh my god.
Hey, at least they're not
yeah.
eating. At least they're not eating it whole.
Well, that is
But
true.
still, like birthday cake.
I know,
It's
right?
good, dude. It really
No.
is.
No, it's not.
I'm gonna bring some down. You're gonna fry
I
it.
That-
You're
that's
no,
gonna
fine.
I will not actually.
We got a trash can. It can go right in it.
Man, that is bright. Sorry, everybody. Yeah. So we are doing our first. I mean, technically,
Technically,
we're all
everything is
part.
history
This is
because
just
it's
the first
all
one that's not.
it's all old.
right.
Um.
Older than Ben. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
In this case, older than you.
Well,
I don't know. You may have known
this
guy.
this one he lived through.
We were actually neighbors.
So, but we are doing our first official history episode. This is for all the Norse lovers out there. The great Viking Harald Hardrada.
Hell
The
yeah.
hard,
let's
the
go.
hard ruler.
Yes. So, yeah, I mean we haven't recorded at this point we haven't recorded in a week or so.
Yep.
And then I think by the time this comes out we'll have our last two episodes that we recorded will be out. The Toy Box Killer. Because I want to apologize. By the time you guys hear this, it'll be episodes late. But I want to apologize. We had a mix-up with uploading recordings of our Heaven's Gate. So the second one came out first. So I had to release both of them at the same time.
Oh yeah. In regard to that, Amy does say thank you for giving both of them
Yeah.
at the same time.
Normally that doesn't happen, but I messed up, so I had to change some stuff, so it will be out of order. But yeah. But Toy Box Killer is what you guys would have just heard, part 1 and 2. I believe, Ben, this is just a one-parter.
Yeah, I will condense this down as best I can to one part. Although I'm sure if Harald Hardrada were here, he would probably demand a whole season dedicated to him. He, on top of being funny, he had a bit of an ego on him, but
Yeah.
it was well deserved.
But and then we've got some other good ones coming out. For our D&D side, we have our Patreon and stuff like that. But we are looking, I believe we are going to start a Patreon specifically for Scarlet Tavern, to release special episodes for this. So keep an eye out for that. We haven't done it yet, but we'll record special episodes specifically for that. Some well-known names will be specific to Patreon. I'm thinking we do a um Charlie Manson Patreon set of episodes. So, because who doesn't want to hear about the uh, serial killer who was best friends with one of the Beatles or one of the Beach
Mm-hmm.
Boys?
Mm-hmm.
He and actually, I would just say Charlie Manson had an amazing fucking voice.
A little helter skelter.
Yeah,
I thought he was okay.
Charlie had an amazing voice, but he just
Mm.
didn't want to record anything.
Yeah,
He was better than the Beach Boys. Beach Boys suck. Um,
I don't know about that.
I hate the Beach Boys.
Well, the Beach Boys hate you.
I'm sure they do. One of them's dead, at least.
Mm.
But without further ado, let's get into Harald Hardrada, Ben.
Thank you, Caleb. As we said, Harald Hardrada, known as the last of the Vikings. Harald Hardrada was born in. Also, before I get started, to any of our Scandinavian friends out there, from Finland all the way to Iceland, I am going to apologize ahead of time. I cannot make heads or tails of your language.
You can send all threats to Ben, Ben, Edwards, Ewards, at dungeonsandmagi.com. Send it right to his email.
Yeah.
He will respond to every single one personally.
No, I will not do that.
Deny
Harold
our
was
fans.
Yeah, I'll deny our fans the privilege of me responding about mispronouncing their language. I do. In all seriousness, I apologize. But as I was, Harold was born in Ringerike, yeah, Ringerike, Norway, in 1015 or 1016 to Asta Gudbrandsdardr, Gudbrandsdardr. I don't know, and her second husband Sigsyr. Sigurd was the petty king of Ringerike, and among the strongest and wealthiest chieftains in the uplands. Now, just to give everyone a little background, a petty king in Norwegian history was basically a village would have the head of the village was known as a king. His authority never left that little village or that town. Norway at one point had dozens of petty kings. Through his mother Asta, Harald was the youngest of King Olaf II of Norway. He would later be known as Saint Olaf. Don't know why, as we'll touch here in a minute. The man was kind of an idiot. Harold had been known throughout his youth as a rebellious and ambitious child. Many anecdotes when growing up, they would ask him, "Say, Harold, what would you want when you get older?" And he would respond, "I want husklars," which are house guards, and from translated from Norse. Many would joke that he was already had aspirations to be king even at a young age. He was also known to be he sprouted up. By age 15, he was already over 6'1". He was described in the sagas as being very stout and manly, and people mistook him for being a fully grown man. Clearly, he did inherit the good genetics of the Scandinavian people. In 1030, Harold's brother had actually hold on. Had attempted to wrest control of the throne of Norway from Canute the Great. Canute was also the king of Denmark, and at one point had been the king of England. Some of the fans of the show, the Vikings, actually may have known him. He was the one who goaded the young king of England, out the gates, and was able to easily bitch slap the king of England and took the throne, and was able to create the North Sea Empire as it was. Olaf had actually had his own bit of a interesting beginning. He was a mercenary um, in the employ of King Ethelred of England, and actually had forced Canute from the throne of England. And Olaf himself obviously had been briefly the king of Norway himself, but Olaf was, by all accounts, a zealous Christian and had forced the conversion of Norway from Norse paganism to Christianity, whether, by all accounts, many of the people there were not ready and did not support the harsh forced conversion. So many of the Norwegian, which is pretty significant, the Norwegian nobles had actually invited Canute to take the throne and force Olaf into exile. This is significant as in Scandinavian history, Norway and Denmark would embark on a many series of bitter, bloody rivalries and wars in there. So for Norwegian nobles to actually ask a Danish king to come and take over is pretty. That kind of says something about how Olaf was seen as a ruler. Olaf would be exiled to the land of the Rus, which is now today Russia and Ukraine. There, and he would stay there for a few years. He had a son, and he took one of his thralls, slave, as his concubine, but then later freed her, and she became his wife. At age 35, though, he's able to gather up some men from Kiev and other parts of Rus and Sweden, and was actually able to march back into Norway. And Harald actually would join him in this battle. Now Harald and his brother arrived with an army of roughly about 2,400 men. Unfortunately, Olaf's devotion to Christianity got in the way again, as most of Olaf's army was initially made up of men from the hinterlands of Scandinavia, which meant he had a lot of pagans in his army. And he was not gonna allow pagans into his army, because why the hell would you want a bunch of battle-hardened sons of Odin and Thor in your army? Right, guys? Am I right?
Sure.
Yeah. So after kicking out all the pagans, his army of 2,400 dropped down to about 1,300, and most of these men were mercenaries and bandits along the way he picked up and just kind of threw money at them to please fight for me. At the Battle of, again, Stiklestad, Olaf was able to ran into the armies of King Canute, although King Canute was not there, and most of King Canute's army had been made up of the peasantry of Norway. It was actually said this is one of the greatest battles of Norway, in the sense that everybody from all corners of Norway were present in this battle. Interesting note of this battle, there actually was, in the midst of battle, there was a full solar eclipse that occurred there. So in the midst of battle, they write of how the sun disappeared in the middle of it, and actually it became complete darkness. But unfortunately, Olaf, while holding initial advantage, simply by attacking first, the battle turned against him, and he ended up with a sword in his face, delivered by one of King Canute's lieutenant generals, who was present at the battle. Harald himself was wounded, but him and his men were actually able to escape. And at this point, many of Harald's men and the rest of the army are fleeing into the woodlands. Harald and his men actually had to manage to get to a farm, and Harald had to hide out in this farm for about a month, and was able to recover all the while trying to keep a low profile and make sure that he wasn't found, because he probably would have been executed at this point. Canute the Great was not known to be merciful to his defeated enemies. He was pretty notorious about making sure you either bend the knee or you lose your head. Now, after Harald had managed to recover, he was able to, him and his his men were actually able to trek across Norway and Sweden, and were actually able to make it to the coast, and took a ship to what is now known today as Estonia and Russia, and made it to the city of Novgorod. To put it in perspective, Harold and his men were able to trek across Norway and Sweden, which is about 1,300 miles, and mostly on foot. So this is actually it was quite a journey. This took them quite a bit. While making down the Dnieper River from Novgorod, he was able to wound up in the city of Kiev, which is obviously still here today. Kiev, interesting, was along with Novgorod, were two cities that were also founded by Viking noblemen from Finland and Sweden. Prince Rurik. Actually, his dynasty would actually be one of the last Viking dynasties to last into history. They lasted up until the 1600s, until the Romanovs and Russia overthrew them. While in Kiev, Harold had actually arrived at probably the most opportune time, because Grand Prince Yaroslav the Wise had actually was in need of trained warriors, and Harold had shown up with about a few hundred, actually, roughly about 500. He entered the service of the Grand Prince, and the prince, wasting no time, had actually sent him off to fight the Poles, who had actually, many of the pagan Poles had actually rebelled against their Christian king, who's I forget his name, but his epithet, his little moniker thing, was known as the Lazy. So he obviously didn't garner a lot of love from his people. Yaroslav had actually been waiting for a chance to initiate a sort of payback against the Poles for past attacks on Kiev. So Harold had actually started off as the like a lowly commander in the Kievan Rus army, and this is where a lot of times Harold would start learning the ways of warfare. Harold obviously was a very great warrior, but he wasn't very well trained or versed in siege warfare or pitched battles. He would soon very much learn the ways of warfare, fighting for the Kievan Rus against the Poles. He fought against many people of that time. Also to include, what is I can't never pronounce these names. It is the Pechenegs. The Pechenegs were a nomadic steppe people from the steppes of Central Asia, kind of similar to the Mongols, but a precursor to them, as the Mongols had not yet gotten onto the scene here. While fighting there, he also, again, learning the ways, he would be able to learn the ways of cavalry warfare fighting there. Vikings obviously having no real need for cavalry warfare, being as Norway is a country of large fjords and cliffs, so horses really don't matter too much, other than from just getting around. Now, while as this is going on, keep in mind, Harold is only 18 when this is all going on. He is not a grown man. He is doing all these things, and he is still doing more than most high schoolers ever do, that we do today. He actually, by 18, he had risen to the rank of captain of Yaroslav's, what they are called, the Drusania, which is Huskarls, the house guards, but in Russian. Now, while at some point in 1034, an official embassy actually arrived in Kiev from Norway, which included one of the men who initially supported Harold and Olaf, but he actually had turned traitor and then supported Canute and eventually Canute's descendant or his son. He arrived after Canute's son had died, and there was now a succession problem in Norway. And he had actually persuaded Olaf's son Magnus to leave Kiev with his mother and ascend the throne with their support, um, more or less robbing Harold of his birthright. By all accounts, Harold was the next line of succession in this case, since his brother, he was the younger brother of Olaf, and he had way more experience and was probably a better king than Magnus, at least initially, because Magnus is only like a little kid at this point. But Harold was away off on a campaign, and when he came back to Kiev, he learned what had happened, and he then asked Yaroslav for leave. He asked leave to leave the guard and go and have Yaroslav's daughter, um, uh, Elizaveta, is hand in marriage. Yaroslav, although he liked Harold and was sympathetic to his cause, Harold may have been king by right, but he was essentially a landless nobleman. And Yaroslav had told him, "You have no way to gain. You have no way to support my daughter, who is a highborn noblewoman. Uh, you must prove to me that you can support yourself and her and take what's yours." Harold, knowing that he was never really going to get rich serving Kiev, took the leave from the Grand Prince, took 500 of his men, and sailed south through the Black Sea to Constantinople. This is also known to the Norse as Miklagard, the great city. Now, to give a perspective on here, Constantinople is part of the Eastern Roman Empire, known as the Byzantine Empire. To put it in perspective, I guess a great visualization. Imagine is like a big dam, but but that's now spouting a bunch of leaks that's falling apart, and they're trying to just slap every kind of cover over the dam and trying to keep it going, but all the while somebody comes along with a chisel and starts trying to break off another piece of it. This is the best analogy of how to describe the Byzantine Empire at this point. The empire is being assaulted by Arabs in the east, rebellious Bulgarians in the west. Most of their holdings in Italy and Sicily are going away. So Harald Hardrada shows up on Constantinople with 500 men, and he plans to join the very infamous Varangian Guard. The Varangian Guard was known as the personal guard of the Emperor of the Byzantine Empire. These men were made up exclusively for a time, but they eventually started including Anglo-Saxons from England. But these men are known strictly as Viking warriors that fought and protected the Emperor of the Byzantine Empire. These men were considered mercenaries by the empire, although they took their oath of allegiance to the emperor to protect him. Very, very easy to become rich in the Varangian Guard. On top of the plunder they often would get from the various battles they would have to fight, they also were paid handsomely by the emperor. And whenever an emperor died, which that happened quite a lot, they actually were allowed to pillage the royal treasury as payment. It was, I can only imagine it just started off as some really shady Vikings wanting to take some back pay that they were probably owed, or opportunistic, like, hey, the emperor's dead, let's go take his stuff, and it eventually just became traditional thievery, because that's exactly what it was. Now Harold had showed up in Constantinople, and he was actually granted an audience with the emperor. Now, some people think that he had actually tried to just kind of sneak in quiet like and take his place there. Unfortunately, he was a very well known within the East, so he was immediately recognized and he was given an audience. And very quickly, he was actually appointed the commander uh, of the Varashian Guard, or at least he was appointed commander of the military part of the Varashian Guard. He wasn't just a lonely bodyguard. He would go off on campaign, and his exploits by all accounts from the sagas are extraordinary. Fighting in he fought in the Holy Land and Jerusalem, supposedly. There's a little bit of debate of whether if he actually fought there or if he was just the military escort. He fought numerous Arab pirates throughout the Mediterranean. Eventually, he'd fight in what is known as Asia Minor and that's modern day Turkey, against many of the pirate havens for there. Uh, he eventually would be sent to Bulgaria, where he would fight against the rebellious Bulgarians there and took out and helped lead the Byzantine forces against against the Bulgarian king. I'm trying to see if we have his name here. I do not. While in Bulgaria, he fought in some very intense battles, and while there he during that war he actually gained the nickname the Bulgar Burner, simply for the amount of enemies that he killed during there. That is, he fought against Peter Dalen. That is the name of the person who in Bulgaria who led up there. Now, while this is all going on, Harold is also having to contend with the court politics of the Byzantine Empire, which some would say were probably just as dangerous as some of the battlefields he fought on. His oath of loyalty was to the emperor, but many people believe that he actually it's hard to determine, but he actually, when he gave his oath, he actually was looking, it was said he looked and gave it to the Empress Zoe, who was many considered the true power at that point behind the Byzantine Empire. But in this relationship he had with her would actually be in many cases some of the root problems that he had that later down the line.
It's always a woman's fault.
We could probably have a whole discussion on her. She was considered a great ruler, but she had one problem. She liked the pretty boys.
So, again, it's always the woman's fault. For all you women listening to this, Ben said it's your fault.
I did not say that.
So send him emails.
Oh, great.
That is Ben Edwards at dungeonsandmagi.com.
Knowing my luck, some very angry Norwegian woman is gonna email me like, "Not only can you not pronounce my language, you're blaming you're a misogynist."
And he lives at.
Don't.
Yes.
Well, so during this time, the emperor, I'm sorry, there's Emperor Michael the Fourth. It actually,
Hey, you pronounce the name right.
I know, right?
Because it's American.
Yeah. Also because I didn't try to pronounce his Greek surname, and just I've already pissed off the Scandinavian. Let's not add the Greeks to this. But
big fat Greek funeral.
Emperor Michael had actually been aging, and his health was in serious decline around the 1041. Um, now at this point when he died, he had died. He had named, instead of naming one of the nephews of Zoe, of Emperor Zoe, he actually named another one of his family as heir, another Michael the Fifth. Michael the Fifth, by all accounts, was very corrupt, very just a he's just a piece of shit
Sounds
by
like
all accounts.
every Michael I know.
Um,
We are just
but
pissing them off left and right
I
tonight.
know, right?
Let's go. And next week we're doing Scientology. Let's go.
Oh yeah.
For that, please send all messages to Caleb.
At
Okay.
at Ben Edwards at dungeonsandmagi.com.
Yes. Yes.
Now
His phone number is
now, Michael the Fifth, after ascending to the throne after the death of Michael the Fourth, had tried to supplant the power of the Emperor Zoe, and um, but unfortunately, due to a popular uprising in Constantinople, was not had not actually reigned for much longer. At one point, when the crowd at the Hippodrome was actually trying to bay for Michael's blood, he had actually had to grab Zoe, who he was about to send off to a convent to live out the rest of her days in exile. It actually grabbed her, taking her off the ship that he had tried to ship her off to send her off on, and just like, here, look, she's here. I didn't kill her. Unfortunately, at that point, nobody really cared anymore, and a citywide revolt slash riot had occurred, which led to the storming of the palace and Michael and his uncle's imprisonment. Now, Michael had also was able to get out and claim sanctuary at one of the monasteries just outside of Constantinople. However, Harold, who was still the commander of the Varangian Guard, did not care about sanctuary. Although even though he himself was a Christian, he really just didn't care and actually proceeded to go into the monastery where Michael the Fifth was, and uh, actually dragged the emperor out of the church after being granted sanctuary, and imprisoned him. Michael the Fifth was eventually blinded. Now, this is actually an interesting anecdote from the Byzantine Empire. If you were blind, you were ineligible to be emperor. So after Michael was dragged out of the church, he was blinded and exiled to live out the rest of his life in a monastery. It is actually said Harold, who hated the emperor Michael the Fifth so much that he actually blinded the emperor himself. Actually held him down and jabbed a hot poker into his eye and blinded him, and subsequently his uncles as well. Now, after this, for a short time, everything seemed okay until um, the Empress Zoe married her third and final husband. I'm trying to remember, see where I wrote down the man's name. I think his name was Constantine. Yeah, Constantine. Constantine the God, I
Ninth.
forget. Ninth, yes, the ninth. God, I knew I was either the ninth or the 10th. I couldn't remember. Thank you, Caleb. Appreciate you. Harold had actually at this point requested to be relieved of his posting from the Varangian Guard so that he could return to Kiev and make his final preparations to take back the kingdom of Norway. Unfortunately, the Empress Zoe would not let him go. No one is quite sure what the reasonings are.
Because she's a woman and she was PMSing.
Well, actually, she was about 70, in her 70s at this point, so
Wow.
that's not happening.
Okay, well, she was a woman and she was going through menopause.
I would like to point out to our listeners here that we are joking and are not this sexist.
But
Please don't hate.
if you have any issues, you can email Ben Edwards at dungeonsandmagi.com.
Please don't email me. They're all jokes, everybody.
Are they though? Are they?
Yes, they are. For the sake of the podcast, they are jokes.
Scientology, you're next.
Yeah, you,
We're gonna record that next weekend when you guys are down from the parking lot of Scientology, because we have a Scientology church like right here.
Oh, okay.
So we'll do it from the parking lot of the Scientology church.
And see how many of them chase us.
See if we can get any interviews.
Oh God!
Come on, Tom Cruise. I've got a couch for you to jump on.
So after this, Harold had again, after being denied his request, Harold was actually at one point imprisoned. Now the reasoning again also for his imprisonment is a little different. Some say it was murder, others it was sexual assault. The prevailing theory slash fact is that roughly around 5,000 pounds of gold had actually gone missing from the Imperial Treasury. No one could find it. I wonder who took it. Well, it just so happens that someone was able to actually sneak to the prison where Harold and some of his men were being held, and actually had managed to infiltrate the prison and got Harold out of prison. At this point, his men, all of his men were essentially made a break for the docks, and had actually loaded two ships up and were able to try and escape across the Bosphorus Strait north to the Black Sea. Luckily for Harold, he was able to get across from it. Unfortunately, his other ship was not. This is due to the fact that um, there was Constantinople had a large ship blocking chain that spanned the straits, and if this chain was fully taut across the way, it could actually destroy a ship, which is exactly what happened to Harold's other ship. His ship was destroyed.
It would
Uh,
almost cut ships in half.
exactly. There are a little debate on how much damage, but yeah, essentially this thing was designed to make sure no ships could ever
I
come
mean,
and go without.
think of whatever like chain and lock you guys picture and amplify it by 1,000.
Yes, it's actually
They
considered
were
something of
giant chain links.
it's considered it was considered something of an engineering marvel for its time. It was one of the reasons. It was, along with other reasons, was a factor in why Constantinople was considered a near impregnable city to
I mean,
outside
we
invasions.
still technically not in that aspect, but we use that design today. That's in like your older countries with drawbridges and stuff like that. That chain that they use is the same exact thing that was strung across.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. But luckily for Harald Hardrada, he was able to get across and he made his way to Kiev. And on the second day he arrived there, he was allowed and was able to marry his first wife, Elizaveta. Now, while Harold was a Varangian guard, he had been sending ship shiploads of his personal wealth to Kiev, so Yaroslav could, in fact, safeguard it for him. Interestingly enough, by coincidence, I think not. Shortly after Harold arrived in Kiev and he left, Yaroslav had actually then declared war on the Byzantine Empire and had led a raiding force against Constantinople. While they weren't able to actually weren't able to get into the city completely, they were able to catch the Byzantines completely um, off their game, flat-footed, however you want to say it, and actually up until the Ottomans had finally breached the walls in 1450s in the 1400s, this is the only time that an invading army got as close to capturing or pillaging the city. And I wonder if old Harold there had something to do with that, considering he was in charge. He was intimately familiar with the defense of the city. Now, while this is going on, the events in Norway had finally shifted somewhat in Harold's favor. Harold had always imagined he'd have to go back to Norway and use his wealth to actually raise an army and fight to reclaim his throne. Fortunately for him, when he came back, his nephew, Magnus the Good, was now firmly in charge of Norway and actually established a stable rule. Harold had actually then gotten to Finland to Sweden via Finland, and had started raiding Denmark in order to try and undermine Magnus's rule, showing that, oh well, you can't protect Denmark. What else? What good is he? Magnus actually was advised and had come up with a compromise with Harold that instead of avoiding a bloody war where many people would die, which, let's face it, Harold probably would have won because he was just made of sterner stuff than Magnus was. I mean, I'm sorry, but you don't get a name like Magnus the Good and are somehow some kind of badass warrior. Doesn't really jive as far as I can tell. Harold would be allowed to they be co-rulers with Magnus, um, ruling as the top seeded as the king, but Harold would rule Norway, Magnus would rule Denmark. Now this worked out for quite some time, and worked out well. They brought relative stability. Of course, it wouldn't last because Magnus would then die very, very suddenly with no heirs. Um, and Harold, while had initially wanted to uh, assert his claim on Denmark and take it, he then really wasn't able to get very much support for it, and he actually was allowed had allowed the kingdom of Denmark to fall to a person known as uh, Swen. Trying to get his last name. I thought I wrote it down here. I did not. Um, to Swen of Denmark, who was a pretender to the Danish throne, but he was able to assert his claim to it, mostly due to the fact that Harold couldn't get the support to take Denmark. Now, at this point, Harold has had a very relatively peaceful and stable reign as the king of Norway. This is also in part to his harshness of dealing with people who showed any kind of discontent. This is where the Hardrada part came in, the harsh ruler or harsh commander. It was at this point in the 1060s, 1050s, 1060s that the beginning of the end of his rule as king would come about when, after not being able to assert his claim over Denmark, had turned to England. Now, during Magnus's reign, Magnus had entered an agreement with one of the older rulers of England, known as Harthcnut, who had died had entered an agreement with Magnus that if either one of them should die before it had no heirs, the other would get their land, get their holdings. Now, it's unclear if Magnus was going to make a serious claim on England because very little preparation had begun, and plus he had other issues to deal with in his kingdom. But Harold, being the successor of Magnus, had asserted his claim over the throne of England, which at this point had fallen to Harold Godwinson. Harold, also very famous for his opposition to William the Conqueror, who also made a separate claim to the throne of England. Harold would then amass a massive fleet and invasion force, and with the aid of Harold Godwinson's brother Tussock, would sailed from Norway and landed in the. I is believed he landed at the mouth of the River Tees, and then he entered the city of Cleveland. That is Cleveland,
Ohio.
Yes, the Vikings invaded Ohio.
Sometimes it seems like it.
Yes. Well, you live closer to Ohio than I do, so I will
Very
defer to
much
you
so.
on that. They after plundering the coast like true Vikings of old, they moved inland, and they were the first resistance they encountered, and Harold encountered in England was in Scarborough. Um, he had While he initially demanded the surrender of Scarborough, they refused, and he ended up burning the town to the ground, which actually was able to persuade other towns to surrender. Um, While this is going on, Harold Godwinson is gathering his army and marching north, and he eventually attempts to reach out to Tausig to find some kind of reconciliation, not wanting to have a civil war with his own brother. Also, understanding the fact that the Normans under William were probably just waiting for the right opportunity to invade. He offered Tausig reconciliation, his titles and lands restored to him in York. Tausig, who at this point had been very bitter and resentful of his brother, um, had said that the time of reconciliation had passed. I have entered an agreement and alliance with King Harold. I have made assurances to him. What assurances does the King of Norway get? Harold Godwinson famously replied, "The King of Norway may receive a 7 feet of English soil from me," meaning he can die. Really?
Yes.
Uh, if y'all folks didn't hear that, there was a little drunk, little.
Oh, they heard it.
Oh, they heard it.
Oh, they
Okay.
heard it.
Yes.
They heard it.
Yes.
So after this, um, Harold and Tausig are able to move in, and they're able to secure the city of York. But as they move south from there, Harold marched right to the town of Stamford Bridge. This is the pivotal moment. This is the point where Harold Hardrada's reign ends. The Battle of Stamford Bridge was a very fierce battle where the two opposing armies were facing across a very narrow stone bridge. It is said that four Norse warriors, possibly berserkers, we don't know, held off the Harold Godwinson's army at the bridge. Now, while this is going on, both armies are shooting arrows at each other, and at one point, a arrow or a crossbow bolt, we don't know, actually sails over and strikes Harold Hardrada in the neck, killing him instantly. The and soon thereafter, the four warriors on the bridge are overcome by the English army, and the Viking army is defeated with the loss of Harold Hardrada. Even though Harold Hardrada's sons were actually present at the battle, they were unable to rally the army, and the men were forced to flee back across York all the way to their ships, and were forced to flee back to Norway. Uh, yep. However,
I was just about to do that too.
you're at the guys. You have to show me how that happened.
I'll show you later.
Um, although ironic, funny enough, Harold would in a way have the last laugh because Harold Godwinson's army was not unscathed by this. I mean, you taking on a force of several thousand Norse warriors is you're not going to walk away from that unscathed. His army was beaten and bloodied from that battle, and William of Normandy, known as William the Conqueror or William the Bastard, by depending on who you asked, had landed his forces in southern England from France. Harold Godwinson would then force his men on a forced march over the course of 3 to 4 days from northern England to Hastings, England, where he would be defeated by William the Conqueror, and Harold Godwinson, the King of England, would be slain in battle. And thus, that concludes the life of Harald Hardrada. Harold is widely known as the last Viking king, and very much like the saga say, he lived up to his Vikinger ancestors, who we will hopefully, I hope at least, to cover in later episodes. But that is Harald Hardrada, also known as King Harold III or Harold Sigurdsson.
Uh, well, I'll just say maybe Belvis was there with Quackicus. But yeah, so that was good. A little history lesson.
Yeah.
I would do. I was a little surprised. I thought you guys asked more questions, considering this is a very pivotal person in Norse history. Considering you both are now, you both follow Norse paganism. Harald Hardrada was not a Norse pagan. However, it is well known that men in his retinue and people he served with were, and unlike his brother, he actually tolerated pagans, at least to the point where he just didn't kill them
Right.
or force them out of his army.
Right. But he was not.
He was
No.
He was Christian.
So
Yes, he was Christian.
So,
He just
there you go.
it's very interesting in his when they talk about, because his stance on Christianity is interesting, because the only thing they ever mention about him is that he was a dutiful Christian, which I've interpreted it as he really wasn't that Christian.
I mean, so he's a modern day Christian.
I was just going there too. I was so going there.
But yeah, so our first history lesson with Professor Benjamin. If you have any issues, you can email him at benedwards@dungeonsandmagi.com.
At this point, all hate mail is probably just going to be sent to me for everything.
It is.
Yes.
Even for our D&D stuff.
That too.
But yeah, so next week we're actually going to be jumping to something a little different. And yeah, I can't wait for that. Let's see. Other than that, anybody have anything else?
Any questions? Anything interesting about Harold?
No.
Like I said, I wish they make an actual TV show about him. I know he's appeared in the Vikings TV show, but I have my own issues with that show.
But yeah, so, well, with that, we want to thank you for visiting the Scarlet Tavern. Please remember to turn in your glasses, push in your seat, and as always, tip the bard. Have a good night, everybody.
Good night.